Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of the Sofa Series Artist Spotlight. Today, with me, we have the stunning, the glorious, the epic Kyle Adam Blair, pianist extraordinaire. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, it is my pleasure. It is a beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day to be inside. Thank you, San Diego, for just driving the point home.
Woo.
The reason we all
Hashtag stay home.
decided, what's that?
Hashtag stay home.
Yeah, stay home. Please don't go outside. It's beautiful. Don't do it. So tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and how did you make your way to San Diego?
It is a long story, and I can be verbose. So let's see if we can keep it tight here.
Okay.
Uh, I grew up in
Do
what
we need a safe word? Do I need to like shout at you something like Kyle?
you can just like walk off camera.
Oh, okay.
uh, just abandon ship. Uh, so I grew up in what I later found out was a term coined on Orange Is the New Black called Pennsyltucky, which is the part of Western Pennsylvania or kind of central Pennsylvania where it's like the forest area,
Uh-huh.
like the 4 hour forest area between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia,
The
uh,
4 hour forest area.
where there are like attempts at like urbanness, but they're with varying degrees of success. So I grew up in a town of 500 people called Home, Pennsylvania, which is right down the road from where Groundhog Day was originated in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. So that gives you a sense of
Love that.
where I grew up. But I tell people I'm from Pittsburgh as much as possible because I loved Pittsburgh and I loved like urban, like that Rust Belt
Mhm.
vibe of like Buffalo and Cleveland, and that's
Fun
something I
fact,
really.
Pittsburghese is my favorite accent. It's my
Oh,
favorite
it's
American dialect. It's so juicy.
it's
It's
very
so
juicy.
wild.
I was fortunate that I was far enough away that I actually didn't get it. So
Yeah.
like that's anybody who's familiar with Pittsburghese and I say I'm from Pittsburgh, they're like you're a liar.
Yeah, I don't
Uh,
believe you. You're
yeah,
not a
exactly.
yinzer.
I'm not in the Yins Nation.
Nah.
But growing up in school, I mean, piano was my first instrument, but
Hmm.
immediately I was trying to get into as many music classes as possible, like regardless of proficiency. So I was a euphonium player for a little bit. I sang in choirs. I accompanied choirs. I did the jazz band. We made a brass quintet. My brother was a trombone player, a good one.
Great.
And so we just took every opportunity to not be in the classroom and to be in the band or choir room as much as possible. Uh,
Yeah.
Music, I thought like I was pretty good at school. Took a bunch of AP classes, but music was the hardest, weirdest thing I did, and
Hmm.
that's why I got the bug for it. And
Hmm.
so had a connection through my private teacher down in Greensboro, North Carolina, in
Hmm.
at UNCG. I did, and that's where I got a heavy taste for contemporary music. Felt like it was a niche. It felt like it was what I was interested in. There was a great music library that I just used to like pull piano sonatas off the shelf, composers I didn't know, and just go downstairs and sight read them. Because like the
Uh-huh.
music library was right in the building, which is really convenient.
That's
So I
great.
was constantly just like taking stuff downstairs in my free time, just like what's this. Um, and so did an initial master search that was a complete and utter failure.
Hmm.
It didn't get in anywhere, but I saw this advertisement for this certificate program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, uh, which was a 1 year program in American contemporary music that seemed right, and it had kind of a late deadline, so it was kind of serendipitous. And I went there, and later found out that the succession for you San Diego music folks that might know Ariana Warren was there, and then Rachel Beats was there, and
Hmm.
then I was there.
Some heavy hitters in the San Diego new music scene, or just Ariana generally. She plays everything. She's in every pit for everything. She is the go-to woman on reeds.
Exactly.
Yeah, with reason. She's amazing.
Oh man,
She's
yeah.
amazing.
As music theater adjacent in this town, I hire her as much as I possibly can.
Of course.
And then I redid my master search out of there, kind of focusing on the first time I was just focusing on like major name classical schools, and this time around I was focusing on contemporary music schools, and the search went really really well. And I had my pick of a few schools, and
What are they? I mean, beyond UCSD, because when I was searching, it was like there was Bard College, sort of,
Mhm.
and just UCSD. So what did you find out there that was really contemporary music interested?
Well, for the piano, I got a lead about Thomas Rosenkrantz, who
Mm,
was at Bowling Green State
mm,
University, which I visited, and the program seemed really, really lovely.
mm.
But for anybody who's been to Bowling Green, Ohio, the town reminded me a little too much of home because it was very, very small and very
Mm-hmm.
remote. Um, and I wanted something like coming out of Baltimore immediately. I had gotten a taste for like Mount Vernon, Fells Point, like all these like the harbor, like these great like urban
Mm-hmm.
um, features of Baltimore, and also the art scene that was kind of weird and gritty.
It's
And
awesome.
so I was like, well, great program, like not the right place. The other spot was University of Buffalo,
Mm-hmm.
which was Eric Hubner, who I also like got along with really well. I liked the program at the time. I think Tony Arnold was there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't meet her, but once again, it seemed like the right program and maybe like not the right place.
Yeah, more Rust Belt.
It like I
Yeah.
loved the vibe,
Yeah.
but having been into Baltimore, I wanted to keep like upping the ante a little bit in terms
Right.
of like what's going on. And so there were these two great young pianists at these schools, and then there was San Diego with Alec, who was playing the music that I loved at the time. I still am. Like I was like super into those like thorny like American composers, Babbitt, Carter sessions, like all of these like super dissonant, super rigorous, like kind of academic
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Academic
composers.
and athletic. You
Yeah,
know, it's
exactly.
it's
Exactly.
hard.
Yeah, yeah. That was the rep I wanted to play, and
Yeah.
Alec was playing that stuff in New York, like a couple of years after it was
Yeah.
written, right? And
Yeah.
so I was like, "This is
He's the
straight from
guy.
the horse's mouth. I'm going to come out to San Diego." I did my master's and my doctorate here, and I've been here ever since. We're coming up on a decade now in
Isn't
San
that weird?
Diego. It's so weird. It's so weird.
I know, like your 20s, you're just sort of like bouncing around. That it just didn't seem. It's like I knew at some point I would stay someplace longer than like a handful. 4 years, I think, was the
Yeah,
longest I'd stayed anywhere.
yeah. This is absolutely the longest I've been anywhere outside of n- you
Home.
a town of 500 people.
Yeah.
No, growing up in Home, Pennsylvania.
Home,
Yeah,
Pennsylvania.
yeah.
What's keeping you here? What is it about San Diego that you like?
Well, I will say like there's a tendency toward the bias of what came out of the UC San Diego experience
Mm-hmm.
was a a very broad sense of what making art now is.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to take it out of it even from music because I was interacting as much as I could in the theater department. I was working with dancers. I didn't so much get over to visual arts, but I know like a lot of my colleagues were
Mm-hmm.
working heavily with folks in biz arts, and so there was a connectedness. And I always, you know, for the UC San Diego folks, like forgive the metaphor, but I always call it like the island of misfit toys. It's kind of this like
Totally.
oasis of like people doing really cool, strange things.
Yeah.
And that vibe and that group of people
Mm-hmm.
has really kept me around.
Mm-hmm.
Some people head to LA, some people have gotten jobs out and about, but there's such a strong contingent of people who I also like thinking that people I've known now for 9 or 10 years,
Yeah.
that I've been making music with for 9 or 10 years,
Mm.
that for me, it's really hard to imagine right now find that community doesn't exist naturally for me. I don't think too
Mm-hmm.
many places,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and like it could be, but I know I have it right now, and I know that there are people I know now who are making really amazing stuff in San Diego and the surrounding areas, and I don't really have a desire to part with that right now.
Yeah, I feel like San Diego, sort of the suburban sprawl, I always find kind of works against itself a little bit, but like despite that, I think that people here are just down to play. You know, like
Yeah.
there's just like a willingness to explore and a willingness to be like, oh, what else can this sound like? What else is there? And oh, that person's doing cool things. I want to play with them. It's
Yeah.
very like curious and an interesting way. And I think it does kind of come from UCSD, and it's hard to. I mean, people tend to kind of like roll their eyes at the academia ness of some of the musics that get presented, but in the in the graduate schools and throughout all of the arts, and including like literature and like dance and theater and visual arts and music, that there was just like this interconnectedness, that there were no hard lines being drawn between the departments, you know. Like I went to the Boston Conservatory, which has an equally great opera program as it does a musical theater program, but never the twain shall meet. You could not. It was
Mm.
like sacrilegious if you mentioned like, oh, I think I would audition for that musical. It's like you what?
Whoa.
Okay, I'll stay in my lane, you know.
Right.
Which like it has its pedagogical. I get where they're coming from, but at UCSD that was just like, nah, go play with your friends. Go out. Get out of my
Yeah,
face. Go play with your friends.
absolutely. And I gained so much from that.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about myself just based on the methodology of, especially in theater. You know, the idea of in so much of what I've done, like a huge percentage, like get the pie graph out and like the big shaded section that's looks like Pac-Man is like shows that I did one time, maybe, but maybe just once, and then discarded.
Mm-hmm.
And or the one recital, like you're one shotting this recital or something. And this is different. Like, you know, could I like curate a tour where I'm doing like this show like multiple places? Sure,
Mm-hmm.
but like a lot of being in that academic world at the time was being kind of a utility player also like amongst this group of people, and saying like, okay, yeah, like I can fill in, you know, for this thing, and I can do this one gig, and it's like one concert, move on, you know, learn this rep, one concert, move on. Where in theater it was like, oh, we get to work on this thing for like 3 months and we're going to run it like 9 times, right? Like we're going to
Right.
do like 9 shows of the same thing, and like through the performing of it we're going to get better at the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like potentially something that should not have been foreign and eye-opening and amazing. Like maybe it should have been something I was familiar with, but it's something that was like eye-opening to me and exciting. The idea of like, oh, we're going to perform this a bunch of different times, it's going to be kind of different every time, but we're going to have a sense that it's growing, that
Yeah.
it's evolving over performances, not just rehearsals, you know.
That's so interesting that you say you say that you came to that, because when I mean I come from the opera world where we get to do that. It's theater, right? You prepare something for the first performance, but you know that the first performance is not how it's going to end up eventually. You know that it's going to change through the course of the production. And then I hadn't done much chamber music. It was strictly opera or voice piano stuff, but never really playing with large-ish ensembles. And so coming to UCSD, where I don't know, the word that's coming to mind, it's like where things are discarded pretty quickly. It's like here's the thing. You have like 2 weeks to learn it. You're going to do it once and then you're going to move on. Yep. That to me was just like, you what now? I have to, huh? It was like overwhelming. I could not get down with that. It was hard. That was really, really, really hard for me. Cause I just like, I don't know, like a performance is not, it's hard to think of it because the performance is like the artifact of your work, right? Of all of the shit leading up to it. This is the artifact that we have after it. And to think that like what I did once is on record somewhere. Like,
yeah.
No, let me try it again. It's gonna get better.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're playing, but like I don't know, you're like the go-to guy. You're the person that people will call in a pinch to just kind of show up and throw down and leave. Does that kind of playing still at all appeal to you, or were you looking more for the things where you can really nurture the piece and grow with the piece?
So that is such a great question, and it's one that I think about constantly. There is it's important for me as a musician. The what is mattering less and less to me as time goes on. The who is mattering more and more and more. And so for me, if somebody contacts me and if I can musically, if I can help them do what they want to do, if I can provide that assistance to this person, then I gain more from that than I do considering what it is. I mean, there have been lots of situations where I've got into pieces that I don't care about at all, but I care about the other performers or I care about the composer a lot. And if it doesn't set me back or if it doesn't harm me to put myself in that situation to say, okay, yeah, let's do it. Like short notice, let's go, let's throw down because like I care about you and I want you to be able to make this thing happen. If I feel like I'm in any capacity to do that for people, then I'm down. Like count me in. And that's always that once again, that's gained more and more importance. Now with that comes this longing for the nurtured thing, or the thing that's mine in a way, or mine in a different way than this kind of like go out and do it kind of scenario. So segueing into kind of like what into the Sofa series. Right. Thicket is super important to me and is something that I've nurtured for a long time. I recorded it for my solo debut record a while ago. I don't know. Like, I think in 2015. Actually, I think
It was a
when
while
I recorded
ago.
it. And it was the kind of thing where I was recording things very slowly, mixing and mastering them slowly. But since then, like this piece emerged amongst, because the record is 5 pieces by my friend Stuart Saunders Smith, who was in his last of 37 years teaching at UMBC when I was there.
Whoa.
He retired that year. And I got to work with him some, and we've since kept in touch in a multitude of like non-computer ways. He's a hardcore Quaker, doesn't really use a computer or a cell phone. It's like we write letters back and forth, landline phone.
Oh.
Yeah, he is like a super old school guy. Uh, and of all of these pieces, this one was the strangest one, the one I had the most questions about.
Mm-hmm.
And because I had the most questions, I asked those questions.
Mm-hmm.
And through asking those questions of the piece, I felt closer to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if there's a moment where it's like, can you, if I need to put another piece on the program, or if there's kind of a variety show style thing where there are lots of performers, like, hey, you want to come play a solo or something, like, I'll say at least 7 or 8 times out of 10 right now, that's the one,
Mm-hmm.
because I've nurtured it for so long, but it also, in the way the piece works, it responds to nurturing, and it
Mm-hmm.
responds to the passage of time, because he provides notes and rhythms, and that's it. And he
Yeah.
asks the performer to compose what it sounds like how loud at any moment, like articulations, phrasing, what notes are actually grouped together. Um, it's counterpoint, so like left or right hand, like predominant at any point, or neither. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
asking you to deal with this complicated uh, melodic and rhythmic material
But also,
and
it's like
respond to it.
it's so contained, right? You're like within you're sort of within an octave. Is that right? It doesn't. You don't
I'm
ever really.
within 2.5 octaves, and the reason for that, I don't know if I mentioned it. This will be maybe an Easter egg for the people who watch this. The piece is written for piano or glockenspiel,
Oh.
and so it's notated the same way. But if you play it on a glockenspiel, it's like what, like an octave or 2 octaves, like sounding higher. But
Mm-hmm.
that's also why he wants the pedal to be down. He wants this just like ringing in the air, unless you have like a pedal glockenspiel, which apparently my percussionist friends tell me is really expensive. That is stuff's just going to kind of ring, and so he's notated it within the confines of orchestra bells, and then is like, oh yeah, you can play it on a piano too. And it was joint commissioned by a percussionist and a pianist.
Oh, I see. I see. So it's just like fascinating to me that like that within in a way so much constraint there is so much agency, right?
Yeah.
That you get to kind of fill in the blanks a little bit, or just paint with a different color one day
Hmm.
than the next. How do you come to make those decisions, right? So when do you feel like it is a decision is the right one, and does it change?
It absolutely changes, and that's where I have this feeling of like, it benefits from my nurturing it in a
Mm-hmm.
way, or like it changes as a result, kind of like, I don't know, like watering a plant or something,
Yeah.
like, or just like adjusting its position, like it'll grow differently like toward the sun, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
something like that, that it changes all the time. But I also want to be uh super respectful of what Stewart's asking, because he I think he underlines in the score the word compose all of this stuff. He doesn't want you to improvise it.
I see.
And so in a sense, it does change over time, but I have to take some time. Like, that time has shortened now, but for now, like, if I'm going to play the piece, like, I've got it in my hands. Like, I could get the thing up and ready to go in like a couple hours to
Mm-hmm.
like perform it at this point, but I need to take 3 or 4 days, maybe at least,
Mm-hmm.
to really experience it and like recompose it, because he wants something that's still prepared
Mm-hmm.
but personal.
And does it change when you move it on to a different piano? I don't think people quite realize that different pianos have just different ranges of expression, or different qualities to them. And so when you if you have the luxury, sorry, my dog. He's screaming at something very important. Hansi! I'm busy! Jeez. Anyway, so
My
do you...
favorite aspect of Zoom meetings is pet interactions. Yeah.
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 Do you ever do you like to take the time on a different instrument and recompose it for that instrument, or do you have kind of general ideas?
Yeah, if I have the opportunity, I
Mm.
don't always have the um to do that, but I think I know the piece well enough that I have the ideas, and if I have enough time to try out the instrument that I'm going to be on,
Mm-hmm.
I know what I have to adjust to make that idea happen
I
on
see.
on the instrument. So I'd say like the idea doesn't change. Now, if I had like lots of time on a particular instrument, it would be super fun for me to be like,
Mm-hmm.
I am interacting with this particular beast. Like, what can it do differently than the other instruments that I've
Yeah.
played on? How can we take advantage of that? Um,
Yeah.
and especially in that part of the piano, like especially when you get up around the top end of the notes that Stuart's calling for, the
Mm-hmm.
most pianos tend to get a little dead up there,
Yeah.
and that also like our ears constantly are if if we're not told like those low notes are the melody, like our ears go up all the time, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
tracking melody upward. And so that's an interesting thing, that those high notes kind of dictate what's going to happen with the rest of it, because that's kind of like the worst part of the piano right up
The upper
there.
register.
Yeah, well, like not the super high register, but like the kind of high register.
I see.
Like right above for those of you keeping score at home, right above the treble staff. When you get into the ledger lines above the
Yeah.
treble staff, that's a really kind of like rough octave for most pianos.
And
Um,
singers.
and singers. Turns out,
We share that in common.
I think like violins are like fine,
Yeah.
right?
Totally fine. Which, fun fact, which is why I actually have a... Here's a little flaw in my ears. I have a really hard time matching pitch with violins. Like something about the timbre and registration of a violin. I'm just like, I don't. It takes a second for me to process the information and be able to transfer it to my instrument.
Wow.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's the weirdest thing, and I only discovered that during the beautiful, wonderful, the class that saved my sanity in UCSD during Just Intonation class with John Fonville, where Batu would be playing something and they're like, "Okay, Leslie, sing a perfect fifth above that." I'm like, above what? I don't understand. It took me a minute.
Yeah, the violin's just this like ghost that you're trying to interact with.
Yes, yeah. It was like this intangible thing. I could not pin it down, and it took me. I had to really work on it. I had to really, really work on it. So there's my dirty little secret, one of many. So can maybe explain a little bit about what sorts of things can change from piano to piano, apart from like just size, right? Like they come in different sizes, but what sorts of things, what kinds of sounds and sonorities can be different?
Absolutely, that's such a great question. I so in terms of there can be it's hammers hitting strings, right?
Mm-hmm.
It like at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're pressing down on a little lever that in some like what are they called? Like Goldberg machines or something, or the
The
little
yeah, little chain reaction, Rube Goldberg.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
I think a
I
piano is
got
just
you.
it's just like a simple one of those, right? That
Totally,
through this
yeah,
like complicated action, you're pressing down a lever and a hammer hits a string. Yay,
yeah.
Bob's your uncle, right? So uh but with that like the string material and like what's going on with the hammers in particular, like
Mm-hmm.
those are your main things. You think like it's like taking apart a percussionist. It's like the percussionist has any percussionist that multi percussionist that you work with, or even any drum set player, is going to have like a bunch of different mallets usually to hit that snare drum or hit that marimba,
Mm-hmm.
with varying degrees of like hardness and softness. What's the core of it?
Mm-hmm.
And that changes what it sounds like. Even when you take out the idea of how hard you're hitting it, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not even coming into play yet. So the different timbres you get are like how new the strings are, right? Like how much they've been
Hit.
hit, what they're made out of specifically. There are certain materials, and I don't even know the ins and outs of this, but I know I know from my days of like attempting to play the guitar to be in a punk rock band that like the kind of strings you get for the guitar have a wildly different sound, right?
Right.
Depending on what they're made
Yeah.
out of and how thick they are, etc., and the tension behind them.
Right.
But also like how hard is the felt, right? Like that's a super important thing. Uh, Newer pianos, if the felt is softer, also once you hit like the felt, think of it like a memory foam pillow. Like the felt's hitting the strings so often that the felt will get the indentation
That's
of the strings
right.
in
They're
it,
little grooves.
or like you like sleep in the same spot on your mattress for like 3 years and then you're like in a hole, right? Like it's
Yeah.
kind of like that, but that part gets harder, right? Because it's like compressed. And so if the felts are relatively new, you can get this really soft kind of lush sound, kind of like you think like a timpani mallet, like the big like cotton ball like
Yeah.
timpani mallets. Whereas as the felts get harder over time, you get like a slightly harder attack
Yeah.
because the felt's compressed, and yeah, it just gets a little harder over time. So uh, the other things are, with with Stuart's piece in particular, he asks for the pedal to be down the whole time.
Right.
I flirt with little bits of half pedal. Some
Ooh.
pianos are better at that than others. So for a quick little half pedal, like it in theory, like the pedal's like, oh, I put it down and it does stuff, and I lift it up and it doesn't do stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
but really, what you can do is those felts we were talking about, if especially if they're in good shape. Um, the hammer hits a string and it's vibrating, and if you lower the felts the whole way, it'll stop, right? But you can lower the felts a little bit, and it'll kind of like cut like the top end of the vibration off, and so it rings on like the lower end, right, but not on the upper end. So it rings like
What?
a little bit, and you can kind of play with that. So in some of the denser passages of Stewart's piece, if the pedal's working well, and if the felts are in good shape, it requires that the pedal's calibrated well, and the felts are in good shape. But you can kind of lower it in varying degrees, like to a point. Like let's
Yeah.
not get crazy. Sometimes John Adams in some of his pieces will be like 1/3 pedal, and I'm like, dude, come on, like whatever. But so like if it gets denser in Stewart's piece, like I can experiment with like lifting it up just a little bit and doing like partial clearings,
Uh-huh.
or have parts where it's like rather than being a big sustained sound, it's kind of like there's just like a little like gauzy lens flare aura around it rather than being like full on soup. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, so we all kind of come to our chosen, I don't know, you find the music that speaks to you the most, and you go down that path, right?
Right.
And it's of course never a linear path, to to wherever you are at any point in your life. So how what is it about Babbitt and Stuart Saunders Smith, about these types of American composers of the 20th 21st centuries that really spoke to you?
That's an excellent question. Because I think I was I'm still really into it. I was more into it then than I am
Mm-hmm.
now, I would say. Or at least maybe I was more stubborn and more headstrong and more like the world is this way when I was like in my early 20s than I am now.
Right.
Um maybe, I don't know. But so I was I think it had something to do with both the instrument I played, but also I was really into playing aggressive punk rock music when I was a kid. I was trying to figure out what it was about that that I was into, because it wasn't necessarily the idea of like aggression, right? It wasn't necessarily viscerality. It was the noisiness of it. It was the dissonance of it. It was the the sound was complicated. You had like a heavy distortion pedal. You
Yeah.
had all this kind of like feedback
Out of tune
going on.
guitars. Like the Clash was
Yeah.
better back when they didn't know how to play their instruments, you know?
Yeah.
As soon
Yeah.
as they like took some lessons, it's like,
And like sometimes you get like off the beaten path. You get these guys that we have a running joke in my group of friends that used to play it, that it sounded like it was recording on an answering machine in the woods,
yeah.
right? Like it's just like lo-fi
Yeah.
filtered through like some awful recording device.
Yeah.
And yet there's this like intensity born of that.
Yeah.
So I discovered that like I was just the first piece that set me off being like, okay, this is the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Was the Aaron Copland piano variations,
Oh,
which
really?
for people who might know Aaron Copland, like uh, Aaron Copland was super well known for like this like big like American like vast like Appalachian Spring,
Yeah.
uh, fanfare for the common man,
Yeah.
the Tenderland, like it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like American pastoral vibes.
Yeah.
But he also had like a weird, rigorous academic dissonance side that he kind of reserved for his piano music. So you'll find it in the piano variations, in the piano fantasy, and the piano sonata,
Yeah.
where it actually gets like kind of
Kind of crunchy.
like furrowed brow crunchy. uh and he treats in that it's almost like he turned consonants on its head and he's using like dissonance as like the thing,
Mm-hmm.
but not like in a super rigorous like 12 tone matrixy kind of way, but in a like, no, like this is my sound palette
Yeah.
and I'm using this, like I'm using my ear for this, and like I'm embracing this dissonance, and that's what I want to hear, kind of in the way that certain like brands of like punk rock were like, this is like our sound palette, right? This
Mm-hmm.
dissonant, complicated sound palette. And I like to use the word complicated because um as a method of communication, I've talked to so many people uh who say, well, that's not like beautiful, right? And that's the constant thing we have, that
Yeah.
that at least I run into, and I think a lot of like musicians who deal with the the brand of contemporary music that I love to deal with,
Yeah.
is that there's this sense of like tonal music and like consonant music being beautiful by nature,
Right.
whereas like this dissonant stuff is, but at the end of the day, I'm like, we're still using language, right? And we're
Mm-hmm.
just using a difficult language, and
Mm-hmm.
it's um for me, like the dissonance I encounter when I'm listening to that music is not unlike me trying to immediately sight read Shakespeare, right? Like if I'm
yeah.
reading Shakespeare, I got to get in the footnotes like all the time, right?
Yeah.
And be like, what is that word that nobody's seen in a million years? And then the grammar of it, right?
Yeah.
And I think like I don't. There's still like beauty in it. It's just like more difficult. There's
It's
there's like a
difficult.
distancing. There's a
Yeah.
distancing. It's difficult. It's complicated, and I'm completely obsessed with the challenge of trying to communicate in that difficult way,
Yeah.
and have and not necessarily change minds. I'm not trying to do it, but I'm
Yeah.
trying to perform in such a way, like this is the music I love, and I'm trying to perform it in such a way that even if one person is like, oh shit, like I think I might kind of get it, then like that's the huge win. Like that's why I do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the
Um,
big thing. It's
Absolutely.
like, but yeah, I mean, I was talking about this with Batya yesterday. Seems like a year ago. But she's saying that like it doesn't matter what anybody plays. I don't hate any particular kind of music just because I prefer things that are maybe a little crunchier, a little uglier, a little bit more difficult. That dirty word.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that anything else has less value, and all that I ever want when I'm going to see a performance, I'm not going there to try to like, clock them for all their mistakes. I'm like, oh well, that phrase wasn't so great. Like I'm there to like, yeah, exactly. It's not a scorecard. It doesn't. I'm there
Yeah.
I'm there to connect with the person who's connecting with a piece of music,
Mm-hmm.
in front of me. It's a weird display. It's a weird thing that we do to get up in front of people and to bare our souls, and it's not. Yeah, I'm not. It doesn't really have anything for me to do with the piece that is being played. It's just the way that the person is conveying the thing that means something to them.
Right.
That's what really connects me. That's why we
Yeah.
go to live performance. Otherwise, we just stay home and listen to our record collections all day.
Exactly.
Otherwise, why do it? I don't
Exactly. Yeah. And there's this sense of there's like a sense like honesty,
know.
belief,
Mm-hmm.
embodiment, like all of these buzzwords that are
Mm-hmm.
like these facets of performances that I love.
Mm-hmm.
That over the years I've felt pangs to. Oh man, like I'm playing all of this contemporary music. Like, should I be playing more stuff from like the canonic repertoire?
Yeah,
And I love that stuff, but the performance of it doesn't feel as honest to me.
for
It
you.
feels like
Oh, that's
I'm
interesting.
putting on a costume
Uh-huh.
in order to be someone else. And that's not to say that I don't love that music. I play
Yeah.
it for myself all the time. I tell people that I adore playing Bach. I adore playing Beethoven. Like Schumann is my man.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes, rarely, I'll perform that stuff. But in terms of communicating with people, that feels like sometimes when I play that stuff, the gonna get myself into trouble saying this. I think,
Uh-oh.
I
Uh-oh.
think, or at least, like I don't want to present myself in a way like I know how to play that music, and I can absolutely play that, and I
I
can
am real
absolutely
good.
like I know how to do it, right? But it feels like sometimes when I'm performing that stuff, like the level to which I've embodied it and the level to which I feel honest about that is akin to what people might say is like a textbook understanding of a language when you go somewhere, right? That I can do it, like I can communicate with people in that way. I can absolutely do it, but there's something about it that for me feels like like that feels like if I were somewhere else, like I could be communicating in a language that is just like totally in my body, right?
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
communicating in a way, and like if I'm not communicating with people, what am I, what am I
What is the
doing?
point?
So
Yeah.
at that point, um, I have this constant fight with myself of like, uh existential crisis of like what kind of pianist are you, like
Right.
shouldn't you be playing Rachmaninoff? And I'm like, I have no desire to play that because lots of people have that in their body and lots of people communicate that so well. uh so like um so I think uh the idea of communication and language and also just like musical language
Mm-hmm.
has been a defining factor into what the projects are that I do want to nurture. Like cuz
Mm-hmm.
I'm scared to nurture something that might not be as honest as it could be or might not have the chance to be as embodied as it could be. And I don't want to be dishonest in that communication because it's not good for me. It's not good for the listener. I mean, it could be like fine, right? Like could be fine. Like if I like learn hammerklavier, like it could be fine, but it doesn't feel right now in my life at the age of 31. It doesn't feel honest.
It's
like,
not the mode of expression. It's not the language that you're connecting with the most.
Yeah, the chance that I'm gonna have like a really profound moment is far less in that than if I play something by Stuart, or if I play like the music that I'm akin to. Like maybe I can have that like really special moment that kind of transcends like doing it like fine or doing it.
You're still, at the end of the day, we're all still human, right? It doesn't matter that we are trained to sort of execute what's on the page, right? We can make sure everything is correct. We can make sure that the phrase is right. You know what it should sound like, because we have so many examples of what it should sound like that precede us for centuries, literally.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if it doesn't feel like it's something that your body can really, really, really get into and chew, then don't. I don't. Yeah, I have this conversation a lot with we use the term like standard rep versus new music people.
Sure.
Which standard rep people didn't know that we called them standard rep people.
It's a club.
It's a thing. I had that conversation recently at a gig I did in Christmas time. But yeah, it's like I do this because it just like I feel like it gets me and I get it, and that is the only reason why anybody should sing or play or do any kind of music. It's because it's the thing that really like lights your fire, Yeah. Otherwise, it's just like meh. You're just doing all the dots on the page, nothing else.
Yeah.
What's the point?
You can do that, and I think like you can do that or you can do the other thing. And I think I think we're both talking about the other thing, like those kind of like magical moments where it's just like there's no gap between you and it. There's no distance. There's no reaching up at it. It's like you're the same, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking with me, Kyle.
Of course, it's been my profound pleasure.
Kyle Adam Blair, you were divine. I enjoyed every minute talking about process and like why do we even why?
Well, if there's anything that this time has shown me, it's like, oh, you have a lot of time to think about you now. For better or for worse, you have a lot of time to
consider,
ask yourself questions, and so it's really cool to have. I've been a fan of watching these, and so it's been a pleasure to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you so much. Alrighty, bye.